welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into this show tonight. Tonight we're going to be speaking with scientist Marshall Barnes about all kinds of things: wormholes, time travel, Star Trek, one of my favorites, and the myth of Stephen Hawking. Now, I'm not really sure what that's all about or what any of the physics stuff really is all about, but we're going to get all edumacated tonight about it. Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com, where you can find out about all the products and services I offer, including medical intuition evaluations, energy healings, and psychic readings. So if there's stuff going on in your life, give me a call, send me an email, and we can set up a time for a private consultation. You can also jumpstart your intuition today by going to www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com and downloading their free 50-page guide. You can open the world to the world of intuition and subtle energy from the comfort of your own home. That's appliedenergeticsinstitute.com. If you've been listening to the show regular, you probably heard me talk about my new movie, Icon: Deconstructing the Archetypes of the Ancients. But I also want to let people know that I have also been putting up some of my video shorts for digital download. This is my new thing, making these videos, on Amazon.com under their, digital download thing. All of them are $1.99. So there's not just Icon. There are some other ones for you to check out, view, download, whatever, $1.99, Amazon.com. Can't beat it. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about Marshall Barnes and bring him on the air. Over the last few years, Marshall Barnes has made waves by claiming he not only discovered one flaw in the physicist Stephen Hawking's time travel scenarios, but that he is also on the brink of making time travel feasible. Marshall is a research and development engineer and conceptual theorist with a specialty in theoretical physics, but not likely ever to be content with just a theory. He expands his brain and therefore his mind and is creating innovative projects, and opportunities for young students to do the same. So please welcome, his webpage is www.about.me/Marshall Barnes. Marshall Barnes. Hey, Marshall, how's it going?
It's going really good. Thank you for having me.
Well, you always have all of these. No, I'm going to say it in a different way. You bring physics down to like the regular people level. Which I totally appreciate, because when you start getting into, the mathematical part, and I mean, some of the theoretical parts I get, but then there's some of it that's like, huh? And I just really appreciate that you make it real for regular people like me, which is great. So let me ask you this. So you were on, I don't know. I mean, it's been over a year. I'm going to say maybe even like a year and a half. And I know for a fact that you always got your hands in some pot. So what have you been up to?
Well, as I said the last time I was on your show, I'm making a move toward, establishing my involvement in space exploration. The privatization of space is a real big thing right now, and I'm a member of the International Space Development. We're actually the National Space Society, which puts on the International Space Development Conference, and I spoke there last year, and also the year before that. Now, when I was on your show, I was talking about how we intend to try to do a test in near Earth, like low Earth orbit, but of this warp drive device I've created, which we're already demonstrating its capabilities here on Earth. It's got extreme capabilities or possibilities if you put it in space on a vehicle and pulse the field, and that's what's been blowing everybody's minds. At the same time, NASA has been working on, well, I shouldn't say just they've been working on a warp drive, because they just released a statement last month saying they weren't developing a warp drive. There's been a lot of talk, chit-chat about Harold White, who is an engineer for NASA, and he had this theoretical idea about how to accomplish warp drive. However, he has not been able to do any experiments in that area at all. And last month, there was some scuttlebutt going on about how they had experimented with this other man's device, which is being described as an electromagnetic drive. And they thought that, well, maybe you could use this to help make warp drive possible. But they're two totally different things. The EM drive device is actually a propulsion system, and in terms of normal types of propulsion, except it's done electromagnetically. And the warp drive concept actually creates a warp bubble. So NASA had to step in before all the rumors and everything went too crazy, and they had to say, we are looking at this EM drive, but we're not developing warp drive. That statement left me as the only person in the world not only looking at trying to do warp drive, but actually having technology that's demonstrable now that could lead toward the development of warp drive in space. So I said I was going to be working on that. That's what's going on. Plus, so only a little bit. Plus, my plan for how to test this in space was accepted as artwork for a poster, both at the 100-Year Starship Symposium as well as the International Astronautical Conference in Toronto, Canada last year. So my plans on how to do this, which includes, how to pay for it, how to get everything where we want it to be just so we could test it out, all that stuff. I'm the only person that has any of that, and this has been seen in 2 different continents. So that's just part of what I did as far as the warp drive thing you're talking about.
Well, and we're going to get into that in a whole lot more detail, because I think that is, people have been talking about that for a really long time. Not just the science, but the whole idea of deep space travel. So we're gonna dig into that. But I have a question. I mean, you don't have 500 degrees and 1 million letters after your name.
No, actually, I have exactly the same degrees that Nikola Tesla had, Thomas Edison, Marconi, Philo Farnsworth, as well as the Wright brothers. 0.
I know,
that's why I can tell people that talk about degrees. That's why I can talk about.
But my comment is, these associations and these obviously high-powered scientists totally take you seriously and credible. And, I work in the alternative history area, and there's always that, they don't have it. They're not an archaeologist, or they're not a geologist, with a PhD and blah, blah, blah. So why should we take them seriously? And I just want to applaud you and pat you on the back, because they do take you seriously. Well,
here's the reason why. Because I'm not dealing in the theoretical area. I mean, I am, but I don't go to them and say, well, theoretically, maybe I could do this. I go to them with the actual product or the actual, documentation that we're actually doing this for real. I don't talk about stuff that's like pie in the sky. And as a matter of fact, I came up with this one really quick. It's one little comeback for any PhD physicist that wants to try to challenge me. I was at the 100-Year Starship Symposium last year, and this guy, he had heard me talk about the technology I'm working with, and he kind of gave me a backhanded kind of comment. He kind of said, I don't know what to say about what you're working on, which meant kind of like, I think you might be kind of loony, you know? And so I said, well, of course you don't. And he said, well, why do you say that? I said, well, do you know what teleparallelism is? And he said, no. And he kind of looked at me like, is this some kind of crazy thing you made up? And I looked at him and I said, well, teleparallelism is a formal title for Einstein's unfinished unified field theory, which he was working on between 1929 and 1932. And describes the coupling of electromagnetism and gravity. And, of course, if you can accomplish that, you can do a lot of things that people talk about with general relativity, but you don't need all the energy requirements. And I said, so you haven't heard about that, right? And he goes, no. I said, well, I guess your education didn't extend that far. And he was like, oh, shoot, he got me. You know, so I don't talk about crazy stuff. I don't say I'm developing technology that came to me from the Pleiades. You know, I don't do that. And I have.
Oh, well, you're no fun. You mean you didn't channel all the information?
If anyone asks me a question like, well, what about this or what about that? How are you going to finance it? Why don't you need NASA? Blah, 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 blah. I have all the answers for all these questions. And that's why they take me seriously.
But that's good. But like I said, that's the part that I applaud you, is that you go to these high-powered conferences and high-powered symposiums, and you're on the stage. And I think that that's awesome. It's awesome. Awesome. Okay, moving on. Next year, we're talking about warping space, and next year is the 50th anniversary of Star Trek, which I think is, all right, it makes me feel really old, but it's also cool. And today we have, we've created technology that envisions things that we've seen in Star Trek, such as communicators. And it sounds like what you're saying, and I know this is a little redundant, but this was the question, that we're getting closer to concepts of warp drive. So how far do you think we're from, how long do you think it's going to take before we get there? Blech.
If I had the money, we could do it, later on this year. In fact, we're working on trying to get the money together so we can actually start to do a test in space by the end of next year. So, I mean, I already know I know how to do it. We're not using the same kinds of solutions that everyone else talks about, okay? All these people keep talking about, well, they're going to create a warp bubble, and it's going to be the Alcubierre warp drive, and blah, 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 blah. These are people who don't know what they're talking about. For example, Miguel Alcubierre, who was a Mexican physicist who first came up with the idea for the warp bubble, he has since said, I can't make this thing work. I can't figure out how it's going to happen. And he's now dissing Harold White. In the meantime, in my presentation at the 100-Year Starship Symposium in 2013, I pointed out that if Miguel Alcubierre couldn't figure out how to get the bubble around the spacecraft, which is what he said before, I mean, this isn't controversial. If you can't do that, and so that you could get the vehicle to control the bubble and go somewhere, then you don't have a warp drive. All you've got is a concept for how to create a warp bubble. There is no drive component there. That's like saying, we've built an engine that will go from 0 to 1,000 miles an hour in 60 seconds, but we don't have motor mounts that will control it. So you don't have anything. And motor mounts, for those of you who don't know, are the devices underneath on an engine block that hold the engine together, an engine in place. If you break your motor mount, your engine will raise up and you try to give it the gas, and it'll cause problems. I've actually seen what broken motor mounts result in myself. So, but that's basically what you're talking about. In other words, you have no drive. And I was shocked that Miguel Alcubierre was admitting to this, because I thought, well, that's the first thing you do. The first thing I did with STDTS technology, which is my technology for warp drive and warping space and all that stuff. The first thing we did was, well, can we get a field to be produced around the front end of a car? Because if we couldn't do that, then the whole idea was completely, useless. And so what we did was we sent the signal from a Black Crowes album into the hood of a car, and then walked along the hood of the car with an analog telephone, or not remote control, but a wireless telephone. It was analog. And we were able to detect the field coming off of the car, which contained the music from the album, the Black Crowes album, in it. So we knew we can get a field around the front end of the car. Then we start working on the kind of field that we theoretically at that time, which was the year 2000, we thought that was going to do the trick, and in fact, it ended up doing it. But I tested it. I tested it for like a year before I really told anybody about it. So, but, you have to know what you're doing. You have to know what steps to take to do this kind of stuff to make it, possible. And, Miguel Alcubierre, the guy that started this whole idea in the first place, he didn't have the first thing correct. And, of course, now he's given up. He's still dealing with solutions from Einstein's equations from general relativity, which requires massive amounts of energy. And that's why none of these guys are going to get any of this stuff to work. Meanwhile, we've already done things. We've got the Fairchild fan, which is the other big project. It's warping space, and now it's opening up micro wormholes.
Okay, we'll kind of come to that. We'll come to that.
Okay, I won't jump ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, don't jump ahead.
Sorry.
But let me ask you this. Okay, so you're talking about they could create a warp bubble. It's like, okay, so what do you need a warp bubble for? And then you were talking, this is kind of a two-parter. And then you were talking about you created an electromagnetic field around the front of the car. Right. Why do you need that in order to make warp travel work or happen?
All right. The real quick answer is you need a bubble, or what I was dealing with, which was basically a sheath. You need those to warp space, which is that enables you to go fast, okay? Because the problem is this. Using normal matter energy conversion processes, for propulsion, at about 40% the speed of light, everything that you're doing to go faster gets converted into mass. Okay, and so that's why we can't go faster than the speed of light. All right. The whole concept with warp drive is that you have some kind of device that is creating a warp field of some kind that doesn't have to be a complete bubble. And as you go through space, this bubble is contracting space to make you go faster. And so Miguel Alcubierre came up with the bubble idea, which had a lot of the inherent problems that came along later on. And I came up with the sheath idea, once again, because I knew something about putting fields around vehicles and fuselages and things like that. I was aware of some of the prior research that had been going on in that area. And basically, what you need is a sheath. You don't need some gigantic bubble.
And so what do you mean by sheath? Kind of like a screen in the front?
A sheath of electromagnetic energy or electromagnetic field. But it's got to be a certain kind. For example, the Russians use a plasma sheath, to try to lower the radar cross-section of an aircraft. Northrop, back in 1968, they were experimenting with applying high voltages to the leading edges of aircraft wings to try to reduce drag. Okay, the Ajax aircraft, which I can't remember that much about it, but it had some kind of sheath that it was working on as well. So instead of some kind of big bubble around something, you have a field or something that is around the object, but it's close. That's why it's a sheath as opposed to a bubble. So in this regard, we had a sheath of an electromagnetic field around the front end of a car that came off of the car body by about three-quarters of an inch, something like that. So, and that was, as the car moved down the road, that field was contracting space, adding about, depending on how much power we put into it, on the average 5% acceleration to the speed the car was going on its own. And so if you would think of that in space, let's say you have a certain initial speed to get you going in the first place, then you could cut your engines, turn this field on, and pulse it. Every time the field comes on, the vehicle goes faster by that percentage. And then when it goes off, because of the way inertia works in space, the vehicle maintains that new speed. And then you turn it on again, and that goes faster by that same percentage. So if you pulse it, you keep going faster and faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. And it builds up, and pretty soon you're approaching the speed of light, you're going faster than the speed of light. But you're not using a whole lot of energy to do that, and you don't need all that exotic matter or whatever that there is that they're talking about trying to create these fields with. And again, the only person in the world that's approaching it that way at this point, because everyone else has kind of pretty much quit, is Harold White. And he thinks he's got figured out a way to try to do it on a small scale But the problem with his approach is that he's going to be testing this on a microscopic level. In other words, they're looking to try to see if they can create a warp bubble that's microscopic, all right? And the first thing we were doing was we were moving full-scale cars down the street going faster. You know, it's like, and so and this is, I can make this judgment based on other research that the European Space Agency did. And the level of difference between what I have, which I actually possess, and can work with now, is like at least 1 million times greater than what Harold White is even going to try to attempt to do, even when he figures out how to do it. 1 million times greater. It's not an exaggeration, you know. So, you know, and so at this point, we're doing a documentary called STDTS, the World's First Warp Drive, and it's going to be like a history of how this whole thing got developed. We're going to do terrestrial tests that are going to be shown in the video. So when people see this, and we're going to have experts on too, they're going to, without seeing what we're doing, they're going to establish like, well, you know, if you have a field that shouldn't be able to make you go faster or whatever, or it shouldn't do this, it shouldn't do that. And then we're going to show it doing it, you know, and so people are going to be like astonished. So we have that. That's going to be coming out later on this year. We're trying to do a deal, Fora.tv. That's Fora.tv. They put it on there. And then we're going to come up with a DVD version, which will have more material on it as well and all that. And all the money we get from doing these things goes toward further development of this technology, because I'm not relying on NASA. I'm not relying on anybody who doesn't control their own budget. So, you know, this is the first, you know, significant privatization of space effort kind of thing. So.
Okay, so see, I'm still stuck on the bubble sheath idea. So let me throw something out at you, and you can tell me if what my notion is kind of correct. So would the bubble or the sheath, okay, so you have your vehicle, your mass moving through space at a speed, so it's going to create more mass, I guess, whatever that number name would be.
You're going by the, what you want to do is, forget that for now. What you want to do is go straight to the solution. The solution.
Well, no, wait.
Okay.
Let me finish.
I'm trying to keep you from getting confused.
Well, no. So my thought, is that the sheath thing would kind of suspend the physics of the mass moving through space at a certain speed, so that you're not dealing with it. Would that make sense?
It's all right.
All right, not really, huh?
Well, I'm trying to. This is the accurate interpretation. Imagine this. Okay, you have a rocket. And you take off from Earth, okay? It's like, you know, and you're going at, say, the velocity of like the Apollo 11, you know, mission. But when you get out, when you start to move away from the Earth, then you cut off your engines, and momentum will still keep you going, but then you turn this field on. And then what happens is now the field is making you go faster, because as you move through space with that field in front of you, that field is contracting it. It's like pulling it towards you. It's like, imagine you're sitting on a rug and you reach out and you grab a portion of it that's up in front of you and you pull it and you're going to move toward it. That's what that field does to the fabric of space-time itself. So because whatever you do in space, you're going to maintain that speed, okay? So if you pulse it with this technology, then every time you turn it on, you're going faster. So that's what's going on. There's no, to try to describe it as a suspension of mass, and all that kind of stuff, it's just misleading. It takes you in the wrong direction.
Hey, I was just kind of making it up, okay?
I'm just trying to help you out, because I'm interested in people actually understanding what's going on, you know. And
that's why I'm asking you the questions, because I'm not a physics person. I don't claim to be a physics person, and so I have a lot of really, you know, maybe dumb questions, but I think they're questions that people have.
No, it's not a dumb question. People. Yeah, it's not a dumb question. I was just, you know, I'm not results oriented, but that's the thing. That's the way to look at it. The way NASA describes warp drive is very similar. They say that the bubble makes you go faster. They don't say anything about going off at an initial speed on your own or anything, but it's basically the bubble was supposed to grab space in front and expand it out the back. But see, space is malleable, so you don't really need the expansion out the back part of it. You just need, but you really absolutely positively need the contraction in front, and that's what we've been doing. So except that our documentaries will show how we're doing it on Earth. Then it's just a matter of applying the same thing to space, and that's it, man. That's all she wrote.
As far as the not the sheath, but the vehicle itself, I would think that you're not going to use conventional, rocket type, chemical rocket type things, and you hear people talk about like mercury engines, engines. Would that be something that would be part of this development, is coming up with a different rocket technology to incorporate with this sheath technology?
Well, that's one thing that's really cool about this, is that, my technology, it doesn't matter what you use for your basic propulsion method to get going or whatever. It will work with anything. In fact, I was at a meeting of this Washington Space Group I'm a member of, and they thought that me and this other guy who had just written a book of all these propulsion ideas, we're going to get into a big argument because, he would say, well, my stuff's better than yours or whatever. And I pointed out, hey, it doesn't matter whatever rockets or solar sails or whatever you use, this thing is just going to make you go faster and save you fuel, And so it's a very non-competitive kind of a thing. However, what I plan on doing is using it for our own purposes. So we already are planning on different kinds of space probes that we're going to use because this is for real for us. We're going to experiment with probes first so we can understand what the physics is actually in real life, because no one's done this before. So we're going to we have a design for a probe that actually has what I call a smart dummy, where, it's like kind of a crash test dummy, except it's wearing sensors and to detect all kinds of things like, cosmic rays and radiation and forces, gravity, whatever. And so we'll get some actual real life data about what happens to a person in this kind of a space, transportation environment and being subjected to these kind of forces. And then we can get a better idea about, okay, so what do we need to do to build a spacecraft that people can be in, be safe, and utilize this kind of technology. So we've got all kinds of plans for that kind of stuff. But our first probes are just going to be like, there's not going to be anybody in them, or not even a smart dummy. So a lot of this is discussed in my new book. It's out, Space Warps and Time Tunnels. And there's pictures of the artwork I was talking about how we want to try to test this near Earth orbit and then go beyond that and all that kind of thing.
Would you be coming up with the technology, the rocket technology to get it into orbit, or would you be teaming up with some of the privatized groups that are working on the, ships that are going into near Earth orbit now?
I have my own people, and they have, they're very qualified. They're all members of like the National Space Society, and they have backgrounds in rockets and all that kind of thing. And so that's how I'm going to do it. We're very, we want to establish exactly how all this stuff works in space before we work with anybody else. So we're kind of keeping everything close to the vest, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Yeah.
All right, and I'm sure you have some kind of guess here. Okay, so your rocket takes off, you're in space, you put your sheathy warp engine on, warp 2, engage. How fast do you think this thing would go?
First of all, here's what we have to do. Okay, this is a scenario for how we're going to do the first step in space. We have a high-altitude balloon, like that Baumgartner or whatever his name was used when he went up and then jumped out and fell back to Earth. Was sponsored by Red Bull. Remember that?
No, but go ahead.
All right. Well, this high-altitude balloon took him up in a capsule, and then near the edge of space, he jumped out. He was wearing a special suit, and he did a free fall out of this thing and fell back to Earth, and eventually, did a parachute or something.
Get out of town.
No, serious. All kinds of people saw it. So we're going to do the same kind of thing, except our high-altitude balloon is going to be taking up a gondola, so to speak, which is inside is going to have a small missile or a small rocket. And then when it gets up to 128,000 feet, it's going to launch that rocket out of the gondola. And then the rocket's going to go up another 128,000 feet. And then from that is going to be deployed a small, what they call pico satellite. It's something about the size of a Rubik's Cube, or maybe even smaller. But this thing is going to pop out of there, and it's going to have some momentum. And then we're going to, via remote control, we are going to activate the field that we're talking about. And if we can track constant acceleration of this object, going around the Earth, then that's it. That's the proof of concept right there. Beyond that, then it's like, okay, we want to get something up bigger and bigger, and then we want to, fly as far away from the Earth as we possibly can, and, all that kind of stuff, which requires, all kinds of research in terms of the craft itself, what the probe's going to be made of. It's got to be made of metal or have a metal coating, because this field technology won't work with anything but metal. So, there's all kinds of things we have to deal with in order to do that. But we have a good idea of what they are and how to go about trying to do them. So it's not a problem.
Cool. So when you get this thing working, are you going to be on one of the ships to go for a little warp tour through the solar system or galaxy?
Well, that would only be after we've done extensive testing.
Well, yeah.
I'm not gonna, if we got that, if everything works out right, we know there's no damage because of radiation or anything like that. There's a lot of issues besides going fast that have to be dealt with, because everyone's like at this point is thinking like, how do we go faster? How do we go so fast with the speed of light? Well, all that kind of thing. But that's just the first step. Then you got to deal with everything else. And so we're at that point where we're not worried about going fast. We're worried about the other portions of it. So after we know that that's all safe, yeah, sure, I might do it. But at the same time, and ironically, for much less money, we also have our other backup project that we have going on, which deals with the Fairchild fan. And I've got people emailing me trying to be the first people to go through once we get scaled up and know what's going on with that. But that's, that doesn't take that much money. It takes millions of dollars of work to do things in space. Although we've cut, like, our first test, that's like the budget for that's like around $800,000. Okay, to do that. But other things, the price is just going to go up. But with this other technology, there's kind of a ceiling. It's like a maximum thing that we would probably have to spend, and beyond that, it's like, it's either it works or it doesn't. And that would be at far less than $1 million, far less. It'd probably be in the neighborhood of, I don't know, several hundred thousand at the most, something like that. I have to double check on it, but, But that also is discussed in that book that I mentioned as well. So people can get a grasp. There's also pictures of the Fairchild fan in action and all that kind of thing. And because we are opening micro wormholes with it, and that's pretty exciting.
That is a very interesting concept, and I'm thinking, do I want to go there yet? Sure. Let's talk a little bit about wormholes. I know that CERN has tried to open up wormholes. Now you're saying you've opened up a couple of micro wormholes, which I want to hear more about. But there are some people that say, opening a wormhole can open the gates to hell or some kind of Pandora's box. But What do you think about that whole concept?
Well, recently, I had an experience with these people, and one of them in particular, and that was Chris Putnam. And what happened is I've heard him and Tom Horn, and I think it was Tom Horn, but, they all say the same thing. I heard him on a radio show, and they were talking about what these guys at CERN were saying. And essentially what the guys at CERN were saying was that, they were trying to open up a portal or some kind of opening to another dimension. And what you have to realize is when they talk about other dimensions, they're talking strictly physics here. We're not talking about metaphysics. We're not talking about anything New Age. We're talking about physics, okay? And in this particular venue, we're talking about string theory. So they're talking about dimensions from string theory. Now, you have to ask yourself, well, what does that mean? And what it means is they're talking about dimensions that are compactified, which means they're small. They're so small that particles won't go into them. They're so small that they need the Large Hadron Collider to generate enough energy to possibly even get one open, okay? So they're talking about something really, 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 really small, and they have no idea what's going to happen as they try to do this. However, even if they do cause a micro black hole to open up, it's going to last such a minute amount of time. And this was confirmed to me a number of years ago when I had this discussion online with Johannes Kloman, who's a Dutch physicist. And he knew all about it. I mean, he talked about the math. He knew all the math about this. And he said, this is why this doesn't make any sense. And I said, okay, well, I understand. They're not going to be open long enough to even be considered black holes by you. But this is what CERN is saying. And they're calling it, they're saying they think that the Large Hadron Collider could become a black hole factory. And I said, if what you're saying is true, then these guys are greatly exaggerating what they're talking about. And he said, and I said, it's no way to do PR. And he agreed. So that happened, like I think it was in 2011, something like that. And nothing went crazy. All these people said, oh, they're going to make a black hole, and it's going to become stable, it's going to get huge, it's going to swallow the Earth, and blah, blah, blah. And none of that happened. And then in 2012, another radio show host was talking about, so they're going to crank up the Large Hadron Collider, and this was going to dovetail with the time period of the end of the Mayan calendar, and this could be it. They could open up this, and do. And I called him up and I said, they exaggerate. It's not that big a deal. Don't worry about it. Meanwhile, I had a prediction about the Mayan calendar that I made years before, and I said I think by that time, either Ronald Mallett, who's a professor from the University of Connecticut, might have his time machine idea to work. And if you can have something that could be a time machine, it would basically mean the end of time, which is what the Mayan calendar was mentioned. They said they were talking about the end of time originally. So if you have time travel as a capability, then that means that could be the end of time, because it would be the end of time as we know it. We would no longer be locked into just this linear experience that we've all experienced since the beginning of time, no pun intended. So I said, or because my STDS technology, if it warps space, it can warp time. Even Popular Science magazine said if you have a warp drive, you can make a time machine. And this is in 2009, I was saying this during a lecture, I said, maybe if Mallett doesn't do something to get his thing going, because I promised I would back off on that idea and let him try to take it for himself, I would step in and I would do something. I said, then maybe I could do that. Well, it just so happened is that I was doing that in 2012, and I did a test. I can't remember what the date is. I put out a press release about it. But it was like the 20th, I think, December 20th. And, in fact, I applied more power to the Fairchild fan, this metal fan that we applied that STDS field to, because that fan is a high-speed fan, and it's spinning really fast. And that field is around that fan. It's enveloping the blades. And every time a blade goes through space, it's contracting it. And before space can be snapped back to its normal, shape, here comes the next blade, and then the next blade, and they're going so fast that the fan looks like a solid disc. So we knew that, this should warp space, and eventually it could possibly warp time. The test was apply more power to it, and because we already could tell it was starting to warp space because it would go out of sync with a stereo light we would sync it up to, which means it was going faster. And so what happened was it started to go out of sync sooner with more power applied to it. And when I say power, I'm not talking about we were applying power to the motor. We weren't doing anything with the motor. We were amplifying the signal that when it touches metal becomes that field that does all the magic, sexy stuff. And so that's what we were doing. We were amplifying it stronger. We jumped it up from, we had messed around between 35 to 50 watts. We jumped it up to 195. And everything started to happen faster. The thing was going faster. It went out of sync quicker. The ozone it produces sometimes started to appear sooner. And so we said, okay, there's a direct relationship between amplification and the results of the field. What I didn't know at the time was that if I had been beaming radio frequency or infrared signals at it and waited, then the signals would start to disappear. I discovered that the following year, the week of Thanksgiving of 2013. So, that, and I just not only discovered that then, but the cool part about that, because we already knew that was going to be happening later or earlier in 2013. The cool thing that happened that week of Thanksgiving was that we did a test where we beamed signals at it from either side. And what happened was the signals, when we reached that threshold point where the torsion effects that were being created by the field rotating with this high velocity fan had gotten to the point that what was seeming to be happening is micro wormholes were opening up. The signals we were beaming at it were disappearing. They disappeared regardless of what side we went into. And what that meant is we had created a toroidal shape, a donut, so to speak. And when those signals went in and hit the center, they didn't come out the other side. They disappeared completely someplace else. And that is just like the sexiest thing you can do in this field, okay? I mean, that's what you want. That's the same configuration of the Stargate, and Stargate SG-1. That's the same configuration of the wormhole that Stephen Hawking had in his documentary for a wormhole time machine. It was exactly that kind of configuration. The only difference is that we're dealing with micro wormholes, but we're forcing them to stay open longer than what they normally would, and that's why those signals are able to disappear into them over time, because it takes time to build up that effect. But by applying the physics of black holes, where if two black holes come and collide with each other, they make one bigger one, then this mesh of tiny micro wormholes that we're able to open up and keep them open long enough to get signals through, they could start to merge with each other until finally we end up with just one big wormhole. And then that's the whole thing. I mean, that's like, the winning the Super Bowl and the Indy 500 and all that stuff. That's just like, break out the Cook's Dry and all that kind of stuff and start celebrating.
But my question is, where's the wormhole going? Actually, what's going through my head is kind of like, AC/DC, I'm on a wormhole to hell. But that's what's going through my head. But, but where is it going? I mean, you're sending, I'm thinking, you're sending these rays through and like some heat rays, and now it's like blasting some guy in his head while he's trying to sleep.
Let me deal with that whole thing, because I'll bring it back to the whole hell thing, okay?
Well, no, that was just a joke because the song.
But I kind of veer off that track. What happened with Chris Putnam and those guys is that Chris Putnam, and I had a conversation with him on his website. I tried to explain to him that you shouldn't take the stuff from CERN that seriously, and he thought he knew more about this kind of stuff than I do. Here's some of the problems. Number one, if you open up a space, there is no telling where that space is. I mean, imagine somebody else in the parallel universe opens up a space here, but I mean, in our universe, right? But like, randomly, what are the chances of him hitting, opening up something here on Earth, as opposed to like in the middle of like, the Milky Way galaxy someplace else, or on the other side of the universe or whatever. So I'm saying, if you do it randomly, if you have no targeting or navigation applied to your system, which CERN does not have, then it's like, who cares? I mean, plus the opening's not going to be held open long enough because there's going to be nothing to hold it open. They don't have exotic matter or negative energy to hold open the hole so that you could do anything with it. It'd be like, it might open up and then close again, really quickly. And if they're dealing with a micro black hole, it's like, so what? It's like what Johannes Clement said. It's like, so what? It's open for a fraction of a split second. Putnam said, well, what if somebody on the other side has the technology to keep it open? What's someone? You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's like, it's like putting you out in the middle of a deserted town, with very few buildings, blindfolding you and giving you a gun, spinning you around and say, okay, shoot the gun and let's see if you hit anything. I mean, it's even worse than that. So those ideas like opening up a gate to hell. What we're talking about physics. Hell, if I remember my theology properly, hell is supposed to be a spiritual domain. Okay, it's not supposed to be physical. It's where the souls of evil people go. So it's not, whatever they open isn't going to open up anywhere like hell. And plus the fact, again, they don't have any way to keep it open. I have a way to keep open our micro wormholes because we're applying a torsion field from a very specific technology that I developed that was based upon experimental results that were related to Einstein's unfinished unified field theory. I can lecture these guys at CERN about what it is I'm doing, which would be radically different than what they're doing. And what they're doing isn't going to give them anything what we have potentially at all, period. So you've got a bunch of people who are taking terms from physics and science and misapplying them, plus the fact they have no clue about what it would take to actually, to answer your other question, pick a destination. We know, we have a really good idea. In fact, our new experiments next month that we're going to do are going to be researching this. We have ideas about how the heck where wormholes open up. Nobody else walking around on this planet does. The reason we do is because we have been studying this kind of stuff and looking at all kinds of different sources of information for over 20 years. We are not novices here, okay? And I've got, I say we because I work with other people, but we're not novices here. And I am in particularly not a novice. I know what the heck I'm doing, you know. And if I can, and here's the thing, if I can keep up with these PhDs at these big conferences you're talking about, I mean, these other people run around talking about, oh, they're CERN is having, like, you know, ghosts come out and demonic spirits, and they're going to open a gate to hell, and all this stuff. We don't know who's on the other side of the veil. I mean, you know, I know so much more than them. It's not even funny. It's just, you know.
Well, I mean, you know, there's the whole demon thing, which I think is stupid. Okay, but I you know, there is I'm going to say an inkling of, you know, I don't want to say truth, but truth to what they say. Because if
what?
a wormhole's created and you hit that other, you know, and this is another question, but you hit the other side, and let's say you do hit an inhabited place of not so nice people, and then they figure out how to connect to your wormhole. Couldn't they possibly send stuff back through the wormhole you created?
Okay, first of all, let me deal with that because I have all the answers to the scenario.
Okay.
Number one, CERN is not trying to open up wormholes. They're trying to open up mini black holes. I've not seen any literature when they use the term wormhole. The other thing they say, though, is they are hoping to try to get an opening to another dimension or whatever. See, the problem is CERN is sloppy with the terminology, just like they were before. They're sloppy with the terminology, and then what they're doing is, I think it might be on purpose. They're doing something I call sexing up the story. They're trying to make the story sound really sexy. Oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and the reality is, no, they're probably not going to get anywhere near doing that. So, and the other thing is, once you get the opening, even if it is a wormhole, it will close right away. You have to have something to keep it open. I do. And I'm not getting it at CERN. I mean, what's keeping it open, and this is something your listeners can relate to. Imagine if you go to a sink and you put the stopper in the sink and you fill it up with water. And now you pull out the stopper and you have this water starts going down and creates a whirlpool. Now, imagine a whirlpool is like a wormhole. What's keeping the wormhole open, in this case, you know, with the water, is the fact that you have that water that's spinning around and around and around and around. That is what's making the whirlpool stable. With a wormhole, you have to have something that's going to keep it stable. And it's going to have to either be, if you're not using my technology, exotic matter or negative energy, something along that line, of which CERN has neither, okay? So it's like, okay, even if they do get a hole opened up, it's going to be very, very small, and it's not going to stay open. And they're not going to have the means to keep it open. It's going to be gone. And now, meanwhile, we know what we're doing. We're keeping the things open. That's why the scientists are freaking out, because instead of the interference being caused by this technology and interfering with the signals right away, the signals go through, and then all of a sudden you see the effects of the technology on space itself, and that's where you start to get the static building up and building up and building up, and then you realize it's disappearing. It's not going anywhere. It's going someplace else. And that is the result of these wormholes, these micro wormholes being forced open. And we don't even believe they're being kept open. They're being kept open longer than they should be. but there's so many of them that you get a signal loss that's equal to 100%. And so what we're doing is we have a means to keep things open longer than they should, and with more power, we can probably make them become one big wormhole. That's the theory, at least, And that's based on black hole physics that anybody who's into general relativity will agree on. Okay, so I'm not going off the reservation here. I'm not talking crazy stuff, So CERN, in the end, CERN has no capability to do any of the stuff that these people are talking about. And the people who are talking about it don't know what they're talking about. Now, you talk about people coming through, even let's say they could keep something open. Then you have the small random chance that it's going to open up to something where there is somebody else. Okay? And then the other thing is, which this friend of mine, when we first started tackling some of these issues, we had this thing called containment that was an issue. In other words, if you open up a portal to someplace, how are you going to make sure that something that comes through isn't going to, take over? How are you going to, stop something bad from coming through? And they do that in Stargate SG-1. They have a guys with automatic weapons. But, it's just it's not a big deal. But, see, the physics would prevent that kind of scenario. Now, if we open up a big one, okay, because I have been mentioning the idea of opening up a big one, we know where we want to make it open up to, okay? We know how to do that theoretically. And it's based on John Archibald Wheeler's concept of it from bit. And he was one of those brilliant physicists of our time. He was probably the smartest guy after Einstein. And he believed that the underpinning foundation of the universe is information. And that if you could figure out a way to interact with the universe, then it would respond a certain way. And he believed in what he called a participatory universe. I like to call it a responsive universe because participatory starts to slide more toward sound like you're maybe suggesting that the universe is conscious. I don't think it's conscious, but I think it can respond to what we do under certain circumstances. And we've been doing research in what do we do, what is it that we have to do to make it respond? And we have some pretty good ideas. And that's how you control where your wormholes go to, all right? And so that solves that problem. So we're not randomly just, willy-nilly opening up a whole bunch of wormholes that would be, traversable to someplace else. And one of the things I told another radio host, they said, well, where do your radio signals go into? I said, well, if they're going back in time, they're probably interviewing or interfering with some guy's TV. Because we were transmitting a picture. We were transmitting a picture of Stephen Hawking. We had a camera on this picture of him, and then we were transmitting the camera signal, into the Fairchild fan. So, it's probably some guy back in 1956, looking at the TV, and all of a sudden this stuff starts to show up on his TV set, and there's this guy, this image of this guy, and he's like, Martha, what's wrong with the TV? I'm trying to watch the Phillies. that kind of thing. So, so that's basically that in a nutshell. I know what I'm talking about, and these other people don't.
Okay. Do you think that when you open up these wormholes, and I have multiple choice here, and it can be all or none of the above, it's going across space-time. Do you think it could be going to a different universe, or do you think it could be going to a different dimension? Again, it could be all or none, or, A or B and not C. I don't care.
The initial response is we think it's going... If we want to use the suppositions of Ronald Mallet, his idea was to use a rotating ring laser that would start to twist space and then eventually would twist time. I think that it will probably go back in time, but we're not sure by how much. Because right now we're just talking about randomly trying to do stuff. Once we talk about adding the equipment to have control over what it does, then we can make it go anywhere. I mean, that's basically the whole idea of control. So right now, I think, it's...
But I'm going to ask the question again. Across space-time, into a different universe, or into a different dimension? Because to me, they're really separate ideas.
Right, they are. Okay, I would say forget about the different dimension, because another dimension, if I'm thinking as a scientist and I think about other dimensions, I'm thinking of string theory. And all the other dimensions of string theory are compactified. you can't even get a subatomic particle into them. Now, or you can't even open them up. You need like CERN to do it. But, the only reason why we're able to do it with these micro wormholes is because the micro wormholes, they open and close rapidly all the time on their own. So at least we got something that's opening up on its own. The compactified dimensions of string theory, they don't open up. They're like really, really, really small, and there is no expectation that they open and close or anything like that at all. So that's why we're able to grab these micro wormholes. Because if you look up any literature about micro wormholes and can you scale it up, one of the first things they say is you try to get down into the quantum foam of space-time, and then you try to grab one of these micro wormholes and you force it open, and then you got to stabilize it, and then you got to try to make it bigger, and all this stuff which they don't know how to do at all. But that's the theoretical model they talk about, and you can't do any of that with compactified dimensions of space or of string theory, because they don't open up. They're so crushed down and so small. That's what compactified means. And it's like you're sitting in a room, and you got ceiling tile that's made of that foam stuff, whatever that stuff is. And then you got like a big living room window, let's say, that takes up like almost the whole side of the house. And then you got, the other walls, which are, let's say they're made of wood. And then you got the carpet on the floor. Now, if you took a microscope and you look at all those different kinds of surfaces, they all have their own little microscopic openings or whatever. But you don't consider those other dimensions while you're sitting in your three-dimensional room. But yet, they all contribute to different oral aspects, and even tactical as well, of being in that room. I mean, sound will bounce off of the window at a higher frequency than not. The carpet will muffle things. The ceiling tiles do different, also kind of muffle to a certain degree. The wooden wall, the sound will bounce off of that at a certain, frequency that's going to be different than the window. We know these things because these are all elements that are used in recording studios and doing recording sessions that try to affect what the sound is in the studio. And I have that kind of a background, so I know that stuff. So, but it's not, it's no more than that. It really isn't.
Okay. Okay, so that's a different dimension. What
Right.
about, hang on a second, I think.
Other universe and space and time. Of course, everything's going across space and time.
Well, yeah,
We're going across space and time right now because we're sitting on a planet that's rotating at 1,000 miles an hour.
But what about the other universe? I mean, because to me, a different dimension is talking about frequency, because I believe that there are different dimensions, like ghosts and spirits and whatever live in different dimensions in our universe. But then there are other universes that, like the whole M universe theory, if you believe in that theory.
Okay, well, M universe, that's string theory.
We have like two minutes. So,
all right, M universe is string theory, okay? And so I'm just going to keep it straight. I'm only talking about physics. So you have multiple universes. I'm going to forget about the cosmological ones because we can't even reach those. But you have the Everett Wheeler ones, which are the results of branching off all the time from where we are. And also, but you have the solution I developed with Wheeler and his idea, and that is if you do something to space itself or the universe itself that indicates a destination in the past, it will spit out a new copy of that, a new parallel universe of that you'll get. And that's how you avoid paradoxes, by the way.
Cool. But we're going to come back and talk about time travel, but I have a couple more wormhole questions for you.
Sure.
I'm Dr. Rita Louise. We're here talking to Marshall Barnes about, say the name of your book?
Space Warps and Time Tunnels.
About space warps and time tunnels. His webpage is www.about.me/Marshall Barnes, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages. Now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second part of the show. This hour is brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com, where you can learn to become a medical intuitive, intuitive counselor, or energy medicine practitioner, all from the comfort of your own home. So please visit their site. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com. Just think you can start your new career today. It's also brought to you by soulhealer.com, where you can find out about all the products and services I offer. So we're here talking to Marshall Barnes about his new book, Space Warps and Time Travel, Time Tunnels. His webpage is www.about.me/Marshall Barnes. Marshall, before we went to break, we were talking about wormholes, and when we didn't talk about time travel, we're going to be talking about that in a little bit. I want to ask one more question before we move on from this whole wormhole idea. Since you've been making these little mini wormholes, and even though you don't really know where they're going, you said that you sent a transmission of like Stephen Hawking's through the wormhole. Have you thought about sending, like in that movie Contact with Jodie Foster, where they sent the binary code, I think it was binary code or prime number code or whatever, and because the science, the language of math is universal. Have you thought about actually sending some kind of an intelligent, signal through there with the thought that it might actually reach somebody on the other side that would be able to communicate back?
Well, see, they wouldn't be able to communicate back unless they had the technology to, open up, their own opening, or their own wormholes or whatever. Plus the fact we have no idea exactly where they're going, okay? So what we want to do is we want to go to the next step, which is where we actually control where the wormholes are opening up to. And as I mentioned before, this is going to be derived from John Archibald Wheeler's idea of it from bit and a participatory universe of idea. And for example, let me just give it to you this way. This is the way I think that your listeners can understand it. You know what synchronicity is, of course, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you could influence synchronicity, all right, just to give you a non-technical way of looking at it, if you could influence synchronicity, then you could influence or raise the probability, because that's what synchronicity is really about. You raise the probability that you're going to open up micro wormholes to a specific destination, okay? And then bingo, there you go. So that's how it would happen. I mean, it's kind of like, there are some people I've heard about who talk about being able to generate synchronicities. So it's the same kind of basic thing. There's a probability of X number of things happening out there, and it's just a matter of, can you make them happen when you want them to happen, since they're going to happen anyway. So that's one way of looking at it. And so as a result, you can control what destination that the wormholes would open up to. So that solves that whole problem. But before you can do that, trying to send a signal to quote-unquote somebody, I mean, who are you going to send it to? And you may not want, and if you do get it to someone, and this is dealing with some complete randomness, maybe you don't want to hear back from them, So it's best if you can control the situation and know what you're doing, which is what we're working on, because we're scientists. We're not, mad scientists, for example.
I don't know, Marshall, I see in your hair. I don't know about the not mad scientist part, but okay. So I'm going off into a slightly different direction, but then I think it's going to come back in. Mm-hmm. What about the concept of extraterrestrials? We're talking about warping space and being able to travel further in space. Do you think that there are extraterrestrials out there? And all right, this is a multi-part question that I think you can answer all at one time. Do you think there are extraterrestrials out there? Do you think they've been using some kind of warp technology? And do you think that they've been coming around in the present?
All right. Well, there is a high probability that there is, intelligent life out there somewhere. The universe is vast. It's like ridiculously vast, okay? And warp drive, I'll tell you a little dirty secret about warp drive. The universe is so vast, warp drive isn't really even going to cut it if you want to go somewhere, very far away. Because I'm not sure exactly what happens if you want to try to go 10 times the speed of light, 50 times the speed of light, whatever. I mean, it's just, we don't know. And the universe is so vast, it would take something like 50 times the speed of light to get to somewhere really serious. So I don't know that, intelligent life from other planets, aliens, so to speak, are coming here from outer space. It's probably more likely that they're coming here from some other kind of a universe, because the dynamics and the physics of doing that are much simpler than trying to fly through outer space. Back a few years ago, Stephen Hawking came up with this announcement that, we shouldn't send radio signals or TV signals up in space because then aliens could pick them up and then they could find where we are and then they could come in like locusts and try to take over our planet and steal our resources and force our women to participate in reality shows on their own planet, that kind of thing. So,
but aren't we constantly sending radio signals out there anyway?
That's what people pointed out to him. He's not as smart as everybody thinks he is. But here's the other part of it. I wrote a paper addressing the whole issue because what I pointed out was two things that were really original that no one else that was responding to him mentioned, which includes Michio Kaku and a bunch of other people. Number one, we have completely misunderstood what intelligence and creativity is all about. And I'll just give you the working example. Let's imagine that representatives from all the industrialized nations convened for a conference on biological warfare at a lab someplace. Pick your country, it doesn't matter. And let's say in that lab, while the meeting was going on, a little microbe escaped that had been weaponized. And this microbe would, it basically infected you, you would not know you were infected for 30 days. You would have no symptoms at all. Then suddenly, you were starting to get sick, and you would be contagious. You were contagious the whole time you were infected. But then it's like it's obviously that you're sick, and then you die in 24 hours. All right. So after the conference is over, all these representatives, Germany, Japan, China, you name it, they all go back home, and then they infect everybody. And so within 30 days or so,
and they become zombies.
They're dead. Okay, that's the way the scenario goes. They're dead. All right, so that wipes out everybody in the industrialized world. Now, after that happens, what do you think the odds are that, tribes in the Amazon or Maasai warriors or, you name it, are going to suddenly decide, all right, we got to try to make 747s or, anything like that, okay? Chances of that happening over, I don't know how long a period of time you want to give them, are practically zero. Because that is not a normal human activity, okay? Look how many.
Amen to that.
Well, look how many countries we have in the industrialized world. How many of them up until now have even been on the moon? I mean, China hasn't put a man on the moon; they put a robot. But I mean, the only United States has actually had feet on the ground on the moon. No one's put feet on Mars, and these are the best of what we've got in this world. Okay, so when you think about all the things that would stop intelligent life, that we would call intelligent, from trying to develop advanced technology, like religion, or they live in a perfect environment, and, perfect, all that stuff, it's like, why bother, man? We're just going to sit here and groove. I mean, it's just all the different things, skepticism, philosophy, war, all kinds of stuff that would prevent them from even thinking up some of these ideas that would result in that. And I don't care. For example, a lot of people talk about, they could be a million years more advanced than us. Really? I don't think so. I don't think that the aliens could be a million years more advanced than we are, because they would have to overcome too much stuff. The most basic part would be the impetus to even try to do something like fly. All right? I mean, look how long it took for man to float. The ancient Greeks thought about it. Leonardo da Vinci had some ideas. None of that stuff happened until the Wright brothers came along. So the idea that millions of years will go by that will give aliens some kind of advanced concept technology, it doesn't really wash. I mean, the problem, I'm not saying it's impossible, but the probabilities are very, very low. And then what are you going to do with it? If you have warp drive, let's say you got to the point where you've got some advanced propulsion system, what are you going to do with it? The first thing you're going to do is, if you're smart enough to do that, you're smart enough to realize most of the planets around you are not going to be habitable. So the first planet you go to that would be habitable, that wouldn't take years to terraform or whatever, you're going to settle there. Now, just think about how vast the universe is. And as far as we know, there isn't anybody near us that would fit this description, that would basically be able to overcome all this stuff and come here. All the stories about aliens and everything that we have have one thing that's missing. We don't know originally, if you want to say it's true, we don't know originally where they're from. There is no evidence that any of the visitors that allegedly have come here have been from outer space. Just because we see them flying around the planet doesn't mean they're from way out there someplace. So that's
there are some people that conjecture that they're time travelers.
Well, I was going to say, see, this comes to the second part of my whole thing of Hawking. What I looked at was this. If you look at the Everett-Wheeler hypothesis, which is the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics that gives you parallel universes, that means in a parallel universe, the Nazis won World War II. All right? Now, they were in the quantum mechanics back then. Okay? Heisenberg, those guys are German. So, they're in the quantum mechanics. That means eventually they're going to stumble across, because this is what I've been reading. Eventually, because of the way they're thinking, they're going to stumble across the idea of the problem of the wave function collapse. And could come up with an alternate theory, which would be that instead of wave function collapsing, the alternate outcomes you don't see exist in parallel universes, which is what Hugh Everett did in 1957. He came up with that idea. So, if that is the case, all it takes is for some scientist that would, get the ear of the Fuhrer and the scientific establishment and go, hey, there could be parallel universes that would be a lot closer to us, and it would be easier to reach them theoretically than trying to find stuff in space. It would be cheaper. We could possibly, if we worked hard enough, we might be able to get positive results out of this sooner than trying to go off and try to terraform Mars or whatever. So all it would take is something like that to happen, and then you've got a real problem. Not us necessarily here, because you have to remember there's a near infinite number of these parallel universes. But what would happen is that they would try to reach a parallel universe, possibly. I mean, for example, one of the things that would compel them to take this seriously is, what if in a parallel universe, their brethren, lost World War II, instead of them being victorious, they could help them. And so now you're talking about spreading the Third Reich across universes as opposed to just planets, You're thinking big scale now, and they could pursue that. Now, what would allegedly happen is, and this is something I just realized recently, is that they would end up in new parallel universes where those things took place as opposed to being any danger to us. So, but that's the kind of thing. Aliens could be from someplace else and not outer space. But that's the big problem. We don't know. Nobody's stopping and saying, hi, I'm from the planet, whatever, Zeta Reticuli or whatever, and talking to us. They're not even making recordings and then beaming them down. They could do. I mean, look, think of it this way. It's very, very simple. I mean, I'm assuming if they can have a spaceship, they can figure out television technology. They could record.
They could figure out Facebook, right? They could figure out Facebook.
Well, the thing is that, I don't even have to figure out Facebook. They could just make their own little video and beam it down to us and say what they're about or what they're doing or whatever. They don't even do that. I mean, just simple things. And then, of course, you could argue, well, they don't want to because of X, Y, and Z. And that's why, I'm kind of yeah, okay, whatever. I've got more important things to deal with and try to worry about, what these intentions of these, theoretical alien beings are or aren't. I mean, because I used to be interested in UFOs, and I finally figured out everything I wanted to know about him, and I'm like, okay, fine. I got other stuff that I think would be more interesting because you can't count on them to show up. It's not like you can make friends and they're going to take you on a ride somewhere, like George Dempsey talks about. And those guys weren't even really aliens anyway, probably. Or probably, like some of the people we're talking about now, they're probably, Germans left over from the Third Reich, not left over, but descendant from people that were part of the Third Reich. Because they had the Nazi saucer technology, as the legend goes. And I think some of that stuff sounds viable. It's amazing what you can come up with if you're given unfettered access. Where you don't have to work. I mean, this is one thing I want your audience to really understand. In the scientific community, it's just like junior high school, all right? Stephen Hawking, Ronald Mallett, Kip Thorne, Richard Obusey, all of these physicists have talked about how they were afraid at one point or another of studying certain things because of peer pressure from, the establishment, or, like, why are you trying to study that? That's crazy. That kind of stuff. I mean, everything used to be crazy. Trying to fly used to be crazy. Television as an concept was crazy. All kinds of stuff are crazy. And one of the things that I've learned, and this is why some people in the science community view me as a threat, is because, number one, I don't go out and talk about things I don't have something to back it up with or substantiate it. And number two, because when I do that and they see that I do have it, it scares the you-know-what out of them. Because I'm not controlled by some kind of university. I don't answer to the head of a department anywhere. I'm not working for the government, and I'm not working for some corporation either that can lay claim to anything I develop because I happen to be an employee of theirs. I'm completely free, and I have the capability of developing all kinds of stuff that's just like, oh my God, he's doing this, and it's challenging the paradigm. And on top of that, I'm not afraid of them, And I'll give you real quickly, and then I'll take a question, but just to give your audience an idea, because this is really important, because a lot of people, like Lee Smolin, even wrote a book, The Trouble with Physics. This is one of the problems that threatens our advancements, why we don't have all the stuff we were promised when we were younger. And this guy was giving a presentation at the International Space Development Conference about my work research. And this guy goes, well, I'm not going to believe it till you get it published in a scientific journal. And I looked at him and I go, oh, I'm sorry, sir, I guess you didn't get the memo. And he goes, memo? What memo? The memo that says that your opinion doesn't mean anything to me because you're not writing any of my checks. You have no control over my research. And that I don't care whether you believe it or not, because we're going to demonstrate this stuff and we're going to use it to make money. And if I publish it in a journal, they're going to want to know exactly how everything works. And then from an economic point of view, it's going to be worthless, and my investors will sue me. So whether you believe this or not, I don't care, because you have absolutely nothing to do with this, and I want to get rich. And everyone started clapping, and he just looked stupid, because I mean that's the thing. It's like these little tricks. Oh, if you're not in a peer-reviewed journal, then it must not be worth anything. And doing what we've been doing, we've had to use models that enable me to exceed the trap or go beyond the traps that usually get the lone inventor. How do you get the money? And then the guys that give you the money want to own most of it. And then there's this and that and all the other crap that usually happens. And I'm beyond all that. So these guys, they don't control me, and I'm smarter than they are. I just am. And it scares them to death, because I'm not afraid, like Mallett has said he's been afraid before, and even Hawking and Kip Thorne, who said in his book Black Holes and Time Warps, Einstein's Outrageous Legacy, he said, a lot of us are into science fiction, but we're free to try to do research too close to the science fiction fringe because of our peers. It's like, nah. It's just childish stuff. But grown men are intimidated by it. It's just like high school. I survived high school. So go ahead.
Okay. So I gather your opinion about extraterrestrials, wherever they may come from, in the present. But what about in the past? I look at, we were talking about, kind of wormhole technology. And in my opinion, I see a piece of architecture like the Gateway to the Sun in Bolivia, in Tiwanaku. And my first impression, not only the name, the Gateway to the Sun, but just the image of it, and I don't know, that my knee-jerk impression looking at it was that it was some kind of a wormhole portal. You walk in this side and nothing comes out the other side because you went through a wormhole. I mean, what do you think about that concept, as far as having had that technology at some point in time in the past? Or people working on that technology?
Okay, well, here's the thing. All of these architectures that people say, oh, that's a Stargate, which, by the way, no one was talking like that until after the movie came out. So that gives you an idea. But the thing about it is that all of these architectures have no evidence of how you would make them active, okay? And I don't, and at least I finally saw in an episode of Stargate SG-1 how you put this little device on to try to energize it, and then it does its magic. But, I mean, they really don't have a good explanation for why it opens a wormhole. They can describe the addressing part of it, but in terms of the mechanism itself, they don't have it. And none of these things that I've seen seem to indicate any way to do that. But to make my point, there is and you were sent pictures of this particular piece of architecture. There's a gate, an arch, that is in Columbus, Ohio, and it was part of a train station. And they have this thing set up at the head of this rectangular-shaped park. And if you look through it, it's just as impressive as the Gate of the Sun, because you look through it and then down. The only thing you see on the other side is this like futuristic-looking apartment structure that's like 3 or 4 football lengths away. But what's weird about this arch is that in coming from the center and going toward the other side, the opposite side, coming out the opposite side, they're cut in the stone is this thing that looks like a wave. It's like a wave that would wash up on the shore, which is kind of funny because in Stargate SG-1, they got this water that comes out of the front and the back, and then, I don't know why that happens, but it does. But in here you have this wave that's moving away from the arch, and it forms in the center of it and goes out, which is kind of indicative of like, okay, if you open up this thing, this is the front side, so to speak. But the wave is there. I don't know why. I've tried to find out, but no one can tell me why that's there. There's also posts that are kind of reminiscent of like the old style posts on a battery that are on either side of this archway that look like, okay, we could hook up cables to this thing. And then there seems to be on the other side, there is some kind of a ornate indentation on each side of the arch, in terms of the part that goes up and down. It's at the base. And it looks like exactly where you'd place some very large bottle batteries, like one on each side, okay? And it's like you can look at this thing and see, wow, this could really be some kind of a Stargate or something. I mean, at least you know how to hook stuff up to it or whatever. It seems to be there. The ground and where that wave is at, I mean, that's in concrete, but the wave, inside of the wave configuration is like brick. And I don't know why would someone cut that in there in the first place. Like these ancient structures, we don't have all the answers. We don't know where to go to because that arch was not like that. It wasn't fitted that way when it was at the train station. And it had been moving around a couple of different spots, and it was never fitted with that wave thing in the foundation. It was never like that before until it got to that spot. And there's a lot of weird synchronicity things going on with that area that it's in. Is it a real Stargate? No. But it seems indicative one. It suggests it. And it's much more interesting than looking at the Gate of the Sun or any of these other ancient places that people talk about because they don't really suggest from a practical point of view, this is what this is for. This is really what this is for. Because that arch where it is in Columbus, Ohio, and there's pictures of it that are going to be in my book, or that are in my book. There's a number of them. And in fact, we used that arch as a backdrop for a rock video that we shot, which at the end of the video, the footage of the band performing in front of the arch is then beamed through the Fairchild fan that we were talking about, and you actually see it, disappear. It happens really fast, but you actually see it getting garbled and it just goes away, and that was done for real. That was not a special effect. So, but we use that arch as a prop, and it looks pretty cool. But that suggests that that's what that is, and it's easy to visualize when you look through it that the vista that you see on the other side could change, and then you could, like as you said, walk through and be someplace else. So, I mean, that's the coolest one. I've seen a lot of these other places before, and I heard about the one that Saddam Hussein supposedly had that from ancient Babylon that is the reason why we did the Iraq War for real, was to get the Stargate.
So do you think that
use
that's true? I mean, I've heard that from so many people, and I'm
yeah,
like,
I know, but see that is what. See what happens is all these people and make stuff up, and then people like Chris Putnam and Stephen Quayle, they act like they really believe it. And I'm looking at them going like, yeah, right. I mean, then they talk about the wormhole opening up over in Norway, and somebody on YouTube posted a comment.
Well, don't forget Antarctica.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm talking about the spiral that happened in the sky. I don't know about one that happened in Antarctica, but there was a spiral in the sky in Norway or something like that. And people were saying, oh, it's a wormhole opening up or whatever. And I know enough about wormholes to know they won't open up in a spiral. And some other guy said, that's actually a missile that's malfunctioning. And I looked up malfunctioning missiles on YouTube, and I found all these videos where missiles do exactly the same thing. They start to take off, and then something goes wrong, and they start to spin around and around. And then that tail they create forms this thing, and it looks like a spiral. And it's like, yeah, well, there you go. But the problem, it's not even a matter of like, do you believe that's really a missile as opposed to a wormhole? It doesn't
but you can't admit that it's a missile if they weren't supposed to be firing missiles, so they have to come up with some other spin on it.
Well, of course, a literal spin. But the thing is, it doesn't match the behavior of an actual wormhole anyway. The people just see that, and then they go, oh, it's a wormhole opening up, it's a portal, and no one knows what the heck they're talking about. And they don't even try to learn. They don't even talk to somebody, like how I got involved with some of this stuff is I actually went and talked to physicists and said, okay, let's just say for a while that this might be possible. What would be the physical attributes of it, or what would we look for, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then they respond, the guys, at least that are interested, they'll respond to it. And they'll say, well, they would have to do this and this and this and that and whatever. But, this stuff that people go nuts over, I was really shocked by all the people talking about, what we talked about before with CERN. I mean, it was just, there's this one girl, she was saying that, CERN is going to warp space and time, and it's a demonic machine, and we shouldn't even be studying time because the time has nothing to do with God. God didn't invent time. The devil invented time because, time gives us suffering and all this other kind of junk, and God is beyond time. And the Bible even says so. I'm like, she said the Bible said the devil invented time. I'm just like, oh my God. The loonies have just come out of the woodwork and latch onto this whole CERN thing. So, but back to your ancient
They get into everything. It's not just CERN. It's freaking everything.
I've never seen it.
But I'm just going to
level before.
Oh,
That's
I
all
have.
I'm saying. Yeah,
I have.
I have. Yeah, I mean, I was used to it from like a UFO field, but this goes beyond the UFO field. The stuff I've been seeing lately, it's beyond it. It's just like, I just was just shocked. It was astonished. I've never seen anything quite so bizarre. But, the ancient astronaut stuff, I remember reading Van Doniken or whatever his name is back in when I was in junior high school, and, Chariots of the Gods and all that kind of stuff. And, who knows? Maybe there was, maybe there wasn't. The thing that kind of made me have my doubts is because Mad Magazine or Cracked Magazine, I can't remember which one, did a thing where, like, in the future, people find all this stuff, and they completely misinterpreted what it was for.
That's one of my things. It's like, 5,000 years from now, they're going to go through some big giant trash pile.
Right.
And they're going to go, these people worship the god of the golden arches and the earth goddess Wendy.
Exactly.
Look, we have her image on this ritual cup.
I know. Right. That's exactly it. So, I don't spend my time in that direction. Although I used to be in archaeology when I was a child, but now I'm an adult and I've got access to these technologies I've been developing, and they work. And seriously, this sounds, to some people may sound crazy, but I'm saying this after I presented this stuff to like real scientists, right? And that's the muster I try to have to pass. I'm not doing this at UFO conferences, and literally what everyone seems to agree upon is that if we apply more power and scale up like the Fairchild configuration, make it bigger and all that we could actually potentially open up some kind of a portal or a Stargate. And with our knowledge of what John Archibald Wheeler was suggesting, that gives us at least a way to try to do something to control where it opens up to. Once you do that, that's it. That's it. And I don't need millions of dollars to do that. I mean, even if we want to have a facility and a lot more equipment, I mean, heck, if I had $100,000, that would be enough, to do whatever we want and within reason,
Do you think, kind of like on Stargate, okay, because this is my frame of reference, sorry.
Yeah, I'm a Stargate fan.
That if we created two of these fan things that you're talking about, and could we create a wormhole? Do you think theoretically, if we had one in the United States and one in England, and I'm just making stuff up, and we activated them both at the same time, that we would be able to create a stable wormhole between the two and create a quasi-transporter technology?
Okay, well, here's the best part about it. You don't need to. You just need one.
Really?
You don't need to.
So you don't have to have a landing platform type thing?
No, you don't. What you do is, if let's say we have the system where we can target where we want the hole to open up to. That's all we need. The hole opens up. The center opens up to that target destination, and we go in. That's it. You don't need to.
Okay, and I'm telling everyone that's listening, if they come up with this technology, don't even think about coming to my house, and especially my bedroom in the middle of the night. I have it bad.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious because I knew this woman, and she was in another country, and this is when I first started thinking I'm going to try to actually do this. This is before I had done it, but I had the ideas. I knew people would say I should do it, and I said, I want to try to open up a wormhole in your living room. And she said, you better not. It was the same idea. I said, yeah, I'm going to try to go over there. I said, send me a picture of your house so we can use it. We can get some kind of idea of, for targeting purposes, how to do that. She said, no.
Yeah, some GPS. Okay. Yeah. But, we talked about wormholes, but you've said that tied to this also is the concept of time travel.
Right.
And Stephen Hawking, just recently in the news,
I know,
has said that time travel is impossible.
Right.
But it sounds like it is.
Let me jump in here. All right, number one. All right, and you mentioned my book before. My book is subtitled The Infamous Legacy of One Stephen W. Hawking. Stephen Hawking is the most overrated scientist in the history of science. And what a lot of people don't understand is that, and I'm going to paraphrase one of the physicists that I quote in the book. He said basically the public perception, or there's a tremendous gulf in the public perception of the value of Stephen Hawking's work and the actual scientific contribution that he's made. Okay, most physicists don't think that Stephen Hawking is all that big a deal, but they keep quiet about it. But the truth, in fact, there's a guy that wrote for Time magazine, and the article was, Stephen Hawking, is he all he's cranked up to be? And if you read that article on the Time magazine website, you can see that's kind of like a little hint of what the reality is. My book goes into detail and documents what was going on, where it was determined in 2009 that he had to try to create a legacy for himself because he hadn't come up with anything new. And people are wondering, well, what's up with Stephen? It's kind of like Tiger Woods right now. Tiger Woods used to be considered like this, golf genius, and then these things started not working out for him, and now it's like he can't even, play a game straight. So the thing is the same things happen to Hawking. And so as a result, the worst area that Stephen Hawking has a record in is the nature of time and time travel. And that's why I was sent on a collision course with him, because that's my area. That's the area I'm committed to. I want to figure out what time was, how it worked, how can you manipulate it, because I believe that time travel might be possible. But unless you know what time is, then you can't do time machines or time travel, because you don't know the heck you're dealing with. And so I took that very seriously, and I was looking for, how does it really work? Does this theory make any sense? I was able to see all kinds of flaws in different theories, and I saw good stuff as well. But Hawking couldn't see any of that. And so I have found so many mistakes that Hawking has made, but the majority of them have to do with either the nature of time and time travel. He has absolutely no clue how time travel would work. I've solved the whole thing about how, okay, for example, you've heard of the idea that time, whether time flows or not. Are you familiar with that?
Mm-mm.
You know, well, in other words, people think time flows, okay? Some of that's for a psychological reason. But what scientists have figured out, and this is your listeners should go to YouTube and look for the documentary, The Illusion of Time. In it, it's hosted by Brian Greene. Brian Greene at one point says, you know, people think of time flowing like a river. Well, it doesn't really flow. We know that now. And he goes on and talks. And then later on in the documentary, he's talking about how if we could reverse the velocities of something that has happened, like somebody drops something, it shatters, and all the pieces go in different directions. He said all we have to do from a physics point of view in terms of the equations or a formula is just reverse those velocities, and then it would all go back together again. Time would run backwards, but we never see that, and it's called asymmetry, by the way. And he was saying, like, you know, how come we don't see that? And it just dawned on me, because I had to come up with a cogent explanation for the nature of time for this book. And I was sitting there and I was going like, wait a minute, the answer's right there in front of them. If time doesn't flow, the reason why we don't ever see things happening backwards is because if it doesn't flow, it's not going to go backwards because it's not going forward ever at all anyway. How can something that doesn't flow go backwards? And then I realized we're being fooled. It's like the air. For example, if you have a dog, and, you know, dogs, like when you go for a car ride, they put their head out the window, and they love to feel the breeze on their faces, you know, when they go down the road. Well, you could be going down the road on a day when there's absolutely no wind. It's just a dead calm. But if the dog puts his head out the window, he's still going to get that effect of going through the air, okay, because if he's going down the road in your car. And he can't tell the difference. It's not going to matter to him because it's the same effect. And that's how time works. Time is a medium that is connected to space, just like Einstein said. Time is connected to space, and what happens is that as we go through time, we have the different effects of like time dilation and all that kind of stuff. That's what stuff becomes manifest. Time dilation is when if you go really fast, your clock will slow down, or if you're in a strong gravitational field, your clock will slow down. But the reason why we can say we're going through time is because every single one of us and everything that exists is actually moving through space all the time. Even if we tie you to some kind of like, you know, something that's not moving, our planet is rotating at 1,000 miles an hour. Okay, and it's doing that around the sun in the solar system, which is moving through space inside of a galaxy. And eventually the Milky Way galaxy is going to collide with another galaxy. I can't remember how long it's going to take for that to happen. We're not going to see it. But the thing about it is everything in space is moving. Atoms, electrons, photons, everything's moving. And because time is connected to space, thus the space-time continuum, we get the effect as if time is flowing. I'm not talking about the psychological sensation. That's something totally different. But I'm talking about time dilation, all these kind of issues. It's like time is flowing, but it's not moving. We're moving through it. Just like the dog going down the road on a dead calm day with his head out the window. And that explains why we don't see things happening backwards, even though physicists can sit there and they can draw the equations that say, well, this ought to happen this way. I mean, but we don't see it happening. It's called, like I said before, it's called asymmetry. So, and as opposed to being symmetrical. So that explains that. And all of a sudden everything fits together. So Stephen Hawking never came anywhere close to that. He still doesn't know anything about it right now. He won't know anything about it until he reads my book. So,
are you going to send him a copy when it's done? Or
nah, he'll find out about it because there's all kinds of. He's been involved in all kinds of stuff nobody knows about, and there's like several scandals in there that he's been involved with that are not like the stuff that the tabloids reported on. But there was like he made a racist cartoon up one time that Ronald Mount told me about. He didn't go into a lot of detail, and I kind of thought he was exaggerating until I found the cartoon, and then I called up Caltech and I said, "How can you explain this?" And then they made the mistake, the dreadful error of trying to basically say, well, we believe that this illustration accurately depicts the physics that Stephen Hawking's talking about. And what he was talking about was the dovetails with his idea of how you can't go back in time. He's talking about a closed time-like curve, and if you try to go into this closed time-like curve when you reach the Cauchy horizon, then the energies would build up and it would destroy the connection and it would destroy you and all this stuff. So he's got this picture. It's a 4-panel cartoon. He's got this black guy looking like he's just got finished playing a game of pickup basketball. And this is all really crudely cut out and pasted together, looks like something a child would do. And he's got him standing there, and then he's got these lightning bolts that look like sig runes, like, from the rune symbols, except they have points on them. And they're striking this guy, and there's like, this, he's making it look like it's like an explosion or something. Then in the next frame, the guy's skeleton is standing there. And then in the final frame, the skeleton is collapsed into a pile of bones. And there's nothing there to tell you, what is this really about? And the only thing in there that's anywhere near that cartoon is the statement, which I'm paraphrasing. He says, and this is in the wake of him describing how this Kochi Horizon thing would destroy the wormhole connection or time machine. And he's saying that, so the future of time travel is black, or should I say blindingly white. It's like, what the heck? It's like, okay, let's see. Where is he? What's he doing with this? And it's obvious that he's using the guy's race to indicate black, and then he's using the sig runes, or the lightning bolts, to signify white. And it's like a coded message, like a wink-wink kind of thing. And at the time that this was done, it was.
It almost sounds like some Freemason thing.
Well, no, really what it sounds like is some kind of goofy thing some frat boys would do, which basically Stephen Hawking's got the mentality of a frat boy. And the thing about it is, I don't want anybody saying, well, how can you criticize Stephen Hawking? I mean, who are you to criticize Stephen Hawking? And then my response to them is, really? Okay, so what's a Kochi horizon? What is the event horizon of a wormhole? And now, can you draw me a two-dimensional space-time diagram showing light cones heading back to the past? And usually the answer is like, they don't know what the heck you're talking about. They don't know any of that, okay? And then my answer is, see, you don't understand what we're talking about to even be part of the conversation, because it's like most people who are Stephen Hawking fanatics, they don't know what the heck he's talking about anyway. And in my book, I have a whole chapter about that. And I have examples of people talking on the internet, and you can tell that they're completely clueless. But, oh, my God, Stephen Hawking, he's so funny and all that kind of stuff, but they don't care about whether the science is accurate. Stephen Hawking has created the impetus for one of the most anti-scientific platforms in the world ever, because most of his fan base, they're completely clueless about science, and they don't care about science. What they care about is that he has the image of being this super genius, this god of the geeks, and yet they can't understand what he's saying, but he's funny. He's got this sense of humor. Like what he said, you talk about UFOs, he said this in a TED.com or TED Talk, and that's on TED.com. He said, I don't know. Some people say that, UFOs are time travelers, and I'm not sure about UFOs because why would they only appear to cranks and weirdos? And that's what he said. And yet this is the same guy that said, we better not send TV signals out into space, because aliens could come and see if we get the signals and come get us. It's like, make up your mind. If UFOs are only seen by cranks and weirdos, which means you don't really believe them, then what are you worried about?
Well, I just kind of take issue with a statement like that because I don't believe that they've only been seen by cranks and weirdos. But that's either here or there. Okay.
Exactly. No,
we have 10 minutes.
Okay, go ahead.
10 minutes. Okay,
right.
So we're talking about time travel, and I want to ask this one question, and because I think it's important.
Okay.
Okay. So, is time travel something we really want to get involved with? And I'm not talking about time paradox, like if I go back in time and kill my grandfather, then I wouldn't be born. But just the whole concept of going back in time and changing something in the timeline, helping the Nazis and so that they win the war, or make it so that, that ends up being the outcome. And then the change in timeline and how it affects more in a bigger situation. Do we really want to go back and have that possibility happen?
Well, first of all, none of the stuff you just described is scientifically possible. I got a $100 bet. So I'm a betting man. I bet Stephen Hawking over the Higgs boson. He didn't answer my email, but it was on record, and I won because they found the Higgs boson. He didn't think they would find it. So here's the deal. I got a $100 bet that, and when anyone wants to try to take it, fine, because I'm adventurous that way. It's impossible
Just
for anyone.
$100?
Huh?
I mean, can't you like put it up to like I'll give you a ride in the warp field
No.
thing in space?
No. Let me get to my point.
All right.
My point is this. It is scientifically impossible, okay, to do any of that stuff, which is all derived from science fiction stories, which the main impetus for the science fiction stories was how do we come up with an interesting plot. None of those science fiction stories has anything to do with physics. And the mistake that physicists have tried to do is try to figure out a way to describe the physics of what these stupid science fiction stories are describing, when they're just basically fantasies. They're plot devices. They have nothing to do with the reality of time travel. You cannot. It's impossible to go back in time where you would cause any of these paradoxes to take place. And here's the number one reason why. First of all, it would violate the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, okay? You only get one outcome per measurement, which means if you go back in time, you're doing another measurement. So it can't be in the same timeline. So that means you absolutely positively have to be in a parallel universe, okay? Now, there's ways that you can prove that you're in a parallel universe, and this is the part of this my contribution goes, because I have this formula. It's called McEPS. It stands for Marshall's Copenhagen Everett Barnes Paradox Solution, all right? And you can run any kind of paradox scenario in through there that you want, and it will destroy it. It enforces Copenhagen, saying you can only get one outcome per measurement. Then it dumps you over into the Everett-Wheeler thing, which means you're dealing with a parallel universe. And then you can prove that you're dealing with a parallel universe by looking for recorded evidence or something that shows that what you're dealing with now is different than what it was before, like the Titanic. You go back in time, you save the Titanic. But we know it sank. We know who died. We know who survived. We saw the movie, the soundtrack, all that stuff. Celine Dion. We got all that. Okay? So if you go back in time, first of all, if you go back in time, you're automatically, it has to be in a parallel universe because you weren't back there the first time. And see, people get confused. They think, oh, well, time travel has to do with what the actors or the participants are doing. They can't do anything. They can't step on the butterfly off of the trail. It'll make the change the future or whatever. All that kind of stuff. It has nothing to do with that because you weren't there the first time around. So you absolutely positively must be in a parallel universe. There's no other way to get around that. And then here's the thing I came up with, though, in addition to that, because I want to give these guys credit. A few years ago, back in 2012, there were these guys that had this thing called I Am Time Loop, and it was some college kid, thing that they were trying to do. But at any rate, long story short, it didn't work. Just like Stephen Hawking's, party for time travelers didn't work. No one showed up in terms of from the future. But they drew out a graph of these supposed parallel universes, and they said, well, we know which parallel universe we're not on. Could we end up being on one of these other ones? And that forced me to look at something that no other physicist had looked at before. How can you be in a parallel universe in the past, even if it's a parallel universe, if you weren't there the first time around? Because that's a paradox. Forget about, in other words, forget about the issue of being on the same timeline. If you go back to another timeline in the past, you're in the past of that timeline, and you weren't there the first time around anyway. So there has to be another solution. And I went looking for it because I wrote a book. It was based on this report I wrote for the Congress. I had to explain to Congress why they shouldn't have to worry about time travel, which is what your issue was, right? And I had to explain this to them because I didn't want them to freak out and go, oh, my God, what if someone goes back in time and changes my election? So what I did was I had to solve that issue, and I did. That's when I found the work of John Archibald Wheeler, and I got into it with the it from bit, the informational foundation of the universe and all that. What happens is if you start to do something that affects space-time that would under normal circumstances, result in time travel to the past, the universe, which is participating in what we're doing, gives us an alternate universe, a parallel universe, but not one from our past. It's not one because I used to think when you would go back in time to a past parallel universe, and the reason why it was a past one, it was when it split off from, and back, like, for example, if you look at the Battle of Hastings in 1066, what if, Norman the Conqueror lost? Okay, what if the Anglo-Saxon shield wall had held and they were able to rebuff the Normans. Okay, that would be an alternate, outcome from what actually happened. So possibly you could go back in time and end up in one of those. Okay, but you weren't there the first time around. That's that problem. That initial action was what I call a falc, first action of cause. All right. So the solution then is exactly what John Archibald Wheeler was talking about, who was a super genius. He didn't take it as far as I'm taking it, but he laid the foundation. And the foundation is that we live in a participatory universe, so if we do something that would end up under normal circumstances in time travel, then the universe gives us that destination, but it's not going to be exactly the same one that we're trying to go to. It's going to be a brand new 1066 with Norman the Conqueror and King Harold or whatever his name was, the Saxons. But it's not good. It's going to be a new one. We're not going to be able to tell the difference, but that's what it's going to be. It's the only way it makes sense. It's consistent. It's elegant. It's cogent. All that stuff. All these people running around like the Terminator stories and all this stuff. I mean, it's easy to find out where they all fall apart, and that's the solution for time travel. And Hawking, he couldn't even appreciate that. He made a huge, real quick. He made a huge mistake in his documentary. He has a mad scientist paradox. You viewers or listeners can look it up on the internet. Mad scientist paradox. A mad scientist creates a wormhole. Inside the wormhole is access to the past by 1 minute. He shoots himself through that wormhole and kills himself to create a paradox. However, when you look through the wormhole to the past, you see the mad scientist, you see the machine he has that's generating a wormhole, and you see the wormhole it's generating, a wormhole that goes to the past by 1 minute. And long story short, I use this as a test question for some of my STEM education stuff I do. How could he be shot through a wormhole that he has set up to connect through the past, and when the guy that's shooting at him is a minute ahead of him in the future? It needs two wormholes. Two wormholes have to be in that past, the one he's generating and the one created by him in the future that opens up in his time frame. Hawking totally screwed that up. And it's very basic. It has to do with the science of multiply connected spaces. And so that's what gets me about Hawking. That's why I ended up thinking, well, how many mistakes is this guy going to make? Because he kept screwing around instead of keeping a focus on cosmology. He kept screwing around with the nature of time and the idea of time travel, and he always messes it up. He's never gotten it right. And that's why my book, instead of thinking it was going to be 200 pages long, it's ended up being 386.
Oops.
It's
Marshall,
I just found so much stuff. What the heck?
Well, that's when you come up with the sequel. Our time is up. Thank you so much for coming on the show and talking to us about time travel and wormholes and what else did we talk about?
Ancient astronauts and all that
Ancient astronauts and warp drive. That was the other one.
Yeah, warp
drives.
Right.
So,
and by the way, real quick, if people are interested in my book, it's exclusively at blurb.com. They do a search for my name. I've got 2 books there. Paradox Lost, The True Geometries of Time Travel, and Space Warps and Time Tunnels, The Infamous Legacy of one Stephen W. Hawking.
Excellent. Thanks, Marshall.
Thank you so much. It was great to be with you again.
Okay, you have a great night, and I will talk to you again soon.
All right, take care. Bye.
All right, bye, Marshall. That's Marshall Barnes. His book is Space Warps and Time Tunnels. His website is about.me/Marshall Barnes. And next week, we're going to be speaking with Will Hart about ancient aliens and the true origin of the species. Until next time, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. This is Just Energy Radio. Be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio.